we've seen how the price elasticity of demand can be measured. Let's think about a few things that affect what the price elasticity of demand is, or in other words, what affects buyers' sensitivity to changes in the firm's price. The focus of your current reading is the idea of the threat of substitutes. So clearly, what kind of substitutes are available for the firm's product is going to be very important. After all, if the firm raises its price by some amount, consumers are going to think about what substitutes are available. They might also think about whether they can do without the product altogether. That is, as your text mentions, a kind of substitution. So the more substitutes are available, the more price sensitive we might expect demand to be. Another consideration is time. How much time do buyers have to adjust their purchases? This is something I haven't really pointed out before, but when we're thinking about demand and we're thinking about how much gets sold in response to a particular price, we're thinking about sales over a particular period of time. So if we're looking at a very short period of time, then a change in price might not leave buyers very much time to find substitutes. But the more time that people have, the more substitutes they may be able to come up with. Typical example along those lines is to think about how people respond to changes in the price of gasoline, for example. So if the price of gasoline is going to be going up, and people realize that, then when it comes time to buy a new car, for example, they will think about buying a more fuel-efficient vehicle than they might have otherwise. But in the short term, people have the cars that they've got, and that doesn't really leave them time to adjust their purchases of gasoline very much. Another issue that buyers have to think about is finding another source of supply, finding those substitutes. So how easy is it for buyers to switch to another firm's product? They might have what are called switching costs. So that's a cost of actually switching suppliers. That may take some time and some effort to find another supplier. If they do find another source of supply, maybe it's going to take some time and effort to figure out how to use that other product. Software is the classic example. If you change from one software package to another, there's a considerable amount of learning is required in order to use that new product. So that might deter you from switching away from the good that you're currently buying. Another consideration is how important the product is in the buyer's budget. If people aren't really spending very much on the firm's product, they may not be paying very much attention to the price. So a change in the price might not lead to very much responsiveness in terms of the change in quantity demanded. But if people are spending quite a lot on this particular product, they may pay more attention to the price, and they may be more price sensitive. In other words, the elasticity of demand would be bigger. Just consider a very simple example. Suppose we're thinking about two different books. One I decided to call The Secrets of Managerial Economics. And let's suppose that that's a textbook. And students are told that they have to buy it. It's required reading for the course. Well, I think your intuition would suggest that if the price of the textbook goes up, demand for that is not going to decline by very much. After all, the students are required to buy it, and there aren't really too many substitutes available. You have to have that book in some form. So perhaps students could share the book, or they might decide to photocopy it or steal it or something like that. Not that I should even be mentioning alternatives like that to people like yourselves, but those are potential substitutes. So in the example that I've cooked up here, I'm supposing that if the price goes up from $20 to $35, sales of the text will decline. People will find some way of substituting, but the elasticity is going to be relatively low, 1.6 here. An alternative book, also about secrets, is called The Secrets of Chinese Cooking. Well, if we're thinking about cookbooks, there's lots of substitutes available, lots of other books about Chinese cooking. So it seems plausible to me that if we compared these two demand curves, the demand for this Chinese cooking book is going to be much more elastic. There's going to be simply more substitutes available. Of course, that doesn't mean that in the case of the relatively less elastic demand that raising the price would be a good idea. We've already looked at the logic of setting the profit maximizing price. We have to think about marginal revenue and marginal cost. Well, I want to turn from these considerations of the elasticity of demand to think about what happens if demand as a whole becomes more or less elastic. This is an important question because we're going to see throughout the course that a repeated theme is that it's going to be better for the firm if the demand for its product is less elastic. In other words, if we just put it in plain English, it's better for the firm if its customers are less responsive to a change in prices. That seems kind of obvious, but let's just see why in more technical terms. I'll just go back to our standard example here, and I'm going to put in some information about marginal costs so that we have a profit maximizing price and quantity. So we've seen from our earlier logic of profit maximization that the firm should produce a quantity up to where the additions to its revenue just are balanced by the additions to its costs. So right there, profits are going to be maximized. If it produces anything beyond that, it will be adding more to its costs than it will be to its revenues. And we saw that at that quantity, the firm should consider its demand curve, that demand relationship, to see what price it can charge its customers in order to sell that profit maximizing quantity. So the demand curve is telling us that the highest price that you can charge in this case is $7.50. Well, how would that decision about quantity and price change if something happened to the demand curve to make it more elastic? In other words, to reflect a greater price sensitivity on the part of buyers. Well, what I'm going to do is to draw in a new demand curve, and we'll see how that compares to the old one. And we'll see how pricing decisions and production decisions are going to change. Well, here's a demand curve, this thicker red curve here, which is more elastic, more price elastic than the other one. How do we know that? Well, let's just look at this point where the two curves intersect. That's at a price of $5 and a quantity of 7 units. In that case, if the price goes up by $1, from $5 to $6, we can see that in the case of the old demand curve, the less elastic demand curve, the quantity demanded goes down to 6 units if the price rises to $6. When demand is more responsive to price, that increase in price decreases quantity demanded from 7 to 5. As an exercise, you could just calculate the price elasticity of demand for those two curves, and you would see that this red demand curve here is less elastic than the black one. Well, what happens in that case? Each of these demand curves has a marginal revenue curve associated with it. I'm not going to go into detail about just where those come from. We've already seen the logic. I'm supposing that marginal costs don't change. So if we just compare the old price decision with the new one, we can see that when demand has become more price sensitive, we can see that price has declined from $7.50 before to now $6. And it declines to $6 because marginal revenue and marginal cost are just equal at an output of 5 here. And to sell 5 units, we're going to have to charge $6 now. So you can see that the increasing sensitivity of buyers to prices has forced prices down. In this case, it's actually increased the amount that we're going to sell, but profits are going to go down. How do we know that profits go down? Well, the difference between the price we're charging and marginal cost has gone down. And so the amount that we're adding to profits as a result of selling each unit has declined. In this particular case, we could actually do a calculation of profits to actually prove that. And I think what I'll do is give you an exercise that has you actually do a calculation along these lines. Well, let's just conclude this by making some a little summary here. We've seen that if the price elasticity of demand goes up, that's going to constrain the firm's ability to set prices. So that means the higher the elasticity is, the lower the price that the firm can charge, and the lower are going to be its profits. So anything that the firm can do to reduce the price sensitivity of buyers would be a profitable action. That's something that we're going to be thinking about later in the course.